Hello, wonderful Nerd Nite audience. Thank you, nerds, for coming out to another session of Nerd Nite A2. I am so glad that y'all are here tonight because, as you can see, we've got an exciting one ahead of us, learning about making a difference, the mystery of chlamydia, and a machine learning primer. So, a perfect Nerd Nite potpourri. But would it be a nerd night if we did not take a moment to go way back in time and appreciate Nerd Nite's origin story? It all started, and I can't believe I'm saying this, nearly 20 years ago with this dude, Chris. Chris was a graduate student, and he studied evolutionary biology. But as any of you who have been graduate students before or are perhaps graduate students now, you know another very important part of graduate school, no matter what you study, is drinking. So Chris, his place was the Midway Cafe in Jamaica Plains neighborhood of Boston. And he would go, and that was where he'd meet his buddies. But in addition to drinking, he did actually have to do the work. And for Chris, that was evolutionary biology. And that meant taking a big trip in the summer, a trip to Cameroon to study the indigo bird. Isn't the indigo bird cute? Yeah. Look at that little sweetie. Guess what? Indigo bird, not a sweetie. Look at those cold, dead eyes. The indigo bird is a jerk bird. Exactly. Because this is what the indigo bird does. When it's time for Mama Indigo Bird to lay her eggs, she goes and she finds a nest another bird made. Now, there are other birds that do this. They're called cowbirds. And typically what happens is the eggs hatch and Mama Bird raises all of the babies together. And one may look a little different, but it doesn't matter at all. And they're one big happy family. Not the case with the indigo bird, because the indigo bird is a jerk bird. When the egg hatches with the indigo bird in it, it savagely kills all the other baby birds and eggs left to hatch, and Mama Bird is none the wiser. So this little jerk bird is raised as an only child, doing so well to thrive again and make this circle go round and round, and that is why Chris went to Cameroon to study this jerk bird. So his 4-month trip is up. He is back home to Jamaica Plains. And he goes, like many of you do, when you've been gone for a long time, you make time to see your friends again. And so night after night, a different friend comes and joins Chris at the bar, and he tells him the story of the jerk bird. And isn't this so interesting and funny? And it is to everyone except for the bartenders, who are so tired of hearing about this bird. And finally, one night they say, enough is enough. I can't do it anymore. One more time. You can tell this story to me one more time. We will cancel trivia night. We will put up speakers and give you a microphone, invite all your friends, because this is your last shot. And they did it. And the bar was full, much like it is tonight. And they said, is there something here? There's something here. And thus, Nerd Nite was born and conquers the world. Or at least there are Nerd Nites happening internationally, including right here in Ann Arbor, and I am very biased, but I think we have the best one. One of the reasons I think it's, thank you. One of the reasons I think it's the best one is because we are the only one sponsored by a library, specifically the Ann Arbor District Library. We love libraries. I also want to say a huge thanks to Live. How neat to get to do a library event in a nightclub right here. And they open the doors for us early on Thursday night, and they work their tails off. So make sure you order your drinks and you tip well. And then I, of course, want to thank you all for coming out when it's cold outside and coming in here. It will be worth it, I promise. But thank you for doing it. And lastly, thank you to our wonderful speakers. We have an amazing lineup tonight. We start off with Senator Jeff Irwin, who is here to talk about changing the world and why Island is the best card in Magic the Gathering. Followed by Shrishti Bade, who's teaching us about unraveling the unknown, about chlamydia. And lastly, Frank Murphy, who's here to talk about how the machines are learning. Why aren't we? So we're going to kick things off tonight with Senator Jeff Irwin, who is currently our state senator. Prior to that was our county commissioner, and prior to that was a state representative. So he has been working for us here in Ann Arbor for a very long time. Please join me in welcoming Senator Jeff Irwin. I'm going to climb down, and I'll hand you the mic over there.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to Nerd Night. I have to say, I'm pretty delighted to be here. I'm trying to figure out what to do with this thing. Thank you for the great introduction. My name is Jeff Irwin. I'm the state senator for the 15th district. So I represent about 290,000 people who live between Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, and all the way down to Tecumseh. And it's a tremendous pleasure and honor to do that. And I'm here tonight to talk about changing the world. That's how I got involved in politics. I came here to Ann Arbor to come to the University of Michigan back in 1995 and, wanted to do great things with my life. And I started getting involved in local politics. I started getting interested in how we could do better for our homeless community here. I started getting interested in how we could do better for our mental health services here. And that's why I got involved in politics. And so, I got involved because I wanted to change the world. I wanted to change how we deal with poverty here in Ann Arbor. I wanted to, change transit system here. And, after some success in local government, I decided, well, you know what, maybe I ought to stick with this. This is a lot of fun. And so let me first just start off, though, by heading off a question that might come up. I hope there are questions. I love questions. But I was recently diagnosed as being too old to play basketball. And so I am recovering from an ACL and meniscus tear. And so I should be walking soon. That was about a month ago. So I'm down to one crutch as of this week. So that's great. So now that I got that out of the way, look, it's just an honor to be here. I always considered myself a nerd. And I was really interested in when I was younger, in my adolescence, and things like Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons and, sci-fi and things like that. I was a big video game nerd. But it's become a little bit difficult to claim nerddom these days because it's gotten so cool, right? I mean, we've got political candidates running as nerds, which was, too bad he won, but it's not as easy to claim the moniker because it's no longer like, swimming against the current. It's sort of like, it's almost as though Frank Zappa was right. I don't know. Are there any Zappa fans in here? Yeah, absolutely. Love Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa said about this, he said, "The geek shall inherit the earth." And boy, was he right? So much has changed since I was an adolescent in terms of how we think about nerds and, the maturing of the tech sector and the information age. And now it's like practically cool to be a nerd. So, of course, there's lots of different kinds of nerds. As I describe myself, I'm, sort of a board game, video game, Magic the Gathering nerd. Are there any Magic the Gathering players in here tonight? Anybody play any Magic the Gathering? A couple brave souls are willing to admit that they sling the cardboard. Well, I probably won't go too deeply into all the magic content I've got prepared for you. But does any of the folks who play Magic, do you have a favorite card, or what's the most powerful card in the game in your view? Black Lotus. What do you think? You sheepishly raised your hand.
I'm not actively playing right now, but I play like every 4 years, get back into it. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I got back into it when I had a son, and he started getting interested in it, and that kind of pulled me back into it. And I'm here to say that the most powerful card in Magic is Island. And for those of you who have played Magic, you know that the island or any basic land is kind of the most boring standard card in the game of Magic. It doesn't really do anything. And I think that when people think about Magic, they think about board sweeps or big creatures or powerful spells that have lots of text and do all sorts of confusing things and, dominate the game. Sometimes in Magic we call them win conditions. They think about these powerful cards. But, the reality is that if you don't have the mana, if you don't have the land to play the card, it's just cardboard. And the analogy to government and public service is that right now we have all sorts of great ideas about how we could do government better, about how we could live better lives, about how we could care for people better. And those reports and that data is often left on the shelf to collect dust. Why is that? It's because while we have oftentimes great ideas, we don't always have the power to get it done. We don't always have, in Magic, they call it mana. Mana literally translates to power. And so that's what I wanted to come and talk to you about today. Like, if you don't, you can have the best card in the world, but if you don't have the power, you can have the best idea in the world. But if you don't have the power to get it done, you're just holding cardboard. You're just waving around a report that you hope somebody might read. Think about it nationally, right? We've got issues like national health care. We see countries all over the world doing it better than us, getting better outcomes for lower costs. Why don't we do it here? It's because we haven't organized the power. Think about gun control. This is a great issue to think about in this context, right? The vast majority of people here in the United States want laws to prevent gun violence. They want gun safety laws. How is it then that 15% of people who don't want anything to happen on gun regulations are able to win? It's because of the power that the NRA and the gun manufacturers built up. And I can tell you as a political actor, when I go around and talk to people, when I run into somebody whose number one issue is guns, that's the only thing they care about. It's the only thing they care about. Think about pollution. In the 70s, people were engaged. People cared. We had the first Earth Day. People were starting to get organized around clean water and clean air. What happened? The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, Superfund, the National Environmental Protection Act. But since then, as the power behind that movement has diminished, and as the fossil fuel companies have been engaging in their own games to build their power, we've seen environmental action slip off the page. You can think about it locally too, right? Well, one of the big issues I've worked on for years is regional transit. We know that based on all the data, a regional transit system is the key investment in our region to make all of our lives better and to grow our economy. And we've got tons of plans. Does anyone remember SEMTA or SpeedLink or DARTA? Now it's the RTA. Now it's the Regional Transit Authority. I hope they're successful. I'll speak for myself. But we've got plans after plans after plans gathering dust. And there's too much time and effort focused on that and too little time and effort focused on building the power to get it done. So, our inability to get these things done isn't usually based on the lack of ideas. It's based on building this power. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the building blocks are, right? What's the equivalent of land or mana in Magic the Gathering to politics? Well, it's incredibly simple. And I ask this question of school kids when I go and read to them all the time. What does it take to get my job? What does it take to get elected in these United States? That's the answer that the kids give a lot, is money. It's a good answer. But it's not the right answer. The right answer is you need votes. So what's the equivalent of mana and Magic the Gathering? It's votes. It's people. And I'm only going to be able to sort of cover this in a cursory way, but it's canvassing, it's phone calls, it's deep conversations with your friends and your neighbors about what's important. It's about organizing these thousands of conversations about people's hopes and dreams and thoughts for their neighbors and for their community. So, these tools of political organizing are somewhat obvious. And, we know about mailing and marketing and digital ads and all of that. But the sort of heartwarming aspect of being involved in politics is that one of the things that really works is a good argument. The facts do matter. And I can tell you that when you make an impassioned and good argument to another human being about how we can change the world, it matters. And I'm asking every one of you to use your power in your daily lives to have those conversations. So let's look a little bit at, sort of more details, right? You look at here in the local situation, what is it you want to see in our community? Think about it. What are your dreams for our community of Ann Arbor? How do you want it to look in 5 or 10 or 20 years? Have you ever shared that with your city council person? I think about, how can we get more protected bike lanes? How can we get a municipal electricity authority to lower costs, improve reliability? How can we get more affordable housing in this town? And what I'm saying is that the answer to those questions is not so much about where the bike lanes go or what percentage of area median income are these affordable units of housing targeted at. It's really more about nurturing the political power to move in that direction. It's really more about the conversations that you're having with your city council people and your neighbors and your neighborhood groups about the direction that we need to move as a community. And so, as I said before, the details are important and they can be part of a good argument. And I don't want to put the details aside because I love details and I think they're important and they can be part of a good argument. But they're only a part of the argument. And the part of the argument that's not happening is that action, is that community building that every one of us has a responsibility to engage in. So if we know a decision is going to be made by council and what what you care about most is getting more protected bike lanes in town, you need to break that down. You need to ask them where they stand. You need to count the votes. You need to figure out who has the power to move the people who are on the fence. And you also need to figure out if you can't change their minds, how can you change their faces? It's a long-term game. And we need to make sure that we get people in there who are going to represent what it is the community is asking for, what it is the community wants, what it is the community is dreaming about for our future. So, politics, it's an evolving relationship that we have with our fellow humans. It's how we resolve disputes and disagreements. It's how we decide how to allocate and organize our resources. And just like with everything else in our lives, this is all dancing on a razor's edge, right? This whole system we have is very, very fragile, just like our lives. And because of that, I guess what I really want to leave with you is not just an urging to get more active, to organize your friends and neighbor, to have these conversations about politics, but also to do it in a certain way. So yeah, I encourage you to vote and, have those conversations, but the certain way that I'm encouraging you to think about this is, to think about some of the non-obvious ways that your behavior affects politics in your relationships and in our community and in our state and in our nation and our world. And right now, one of the things that I feel is really problematic to our politics is that the right, broadly speaking, people who are, come from a conservative right-wing outlook, has been engaged in a consistent long-term campaign to denigrate government, to tear down public service. And as I understand it in my mind, because of my age, this all started with Reagan, right? Reagan said that, the scariest words you can hear are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? And he ran with a guy named Grover Norquist who said he wanted to make the government so small you could drown it in a bathtub. And we have to fight that. Why? Because it's toxic and it's wrong. It's wrong. So let me give you a couple examples of what I mean by that. When we talk about roads, I find roads to be kind of a boring issue, right? But when we talk, they're important. When we talk about roads, I'm picking a boring issue for a reason. When we talk about roads, we often talk about how there are potholes or how they're not sufficiently cleared or they're poorly designed or they're dirty or they're unsafe, right? We always talk about the problems because as I'm a liberal, I'm a left winger, as that kind of person, I want to fix these problems. So that's why I talk about them. But when I do that, I'm playing into their hand because at the end of the day, the whole conversation is about the problems. And no one ever stops to say, when we connect people and places, all sorts of good things happen. Good things happen culturally, it improves our quality of life, it improves our economy. The road network that we've invested in as a society, for all of its faults, which we should attend to, is a huge success. Let me give you an even better one. Education. There are so many problems with public education right now. There's inequities. There's big problems with special education and inadequacy there. There's issues with literacy rates that I'm trying to fix with some legislation around phonics and dyslexia. There's all sorts of problems. We're not paying teachers enough to attract and retain great educators. All sorts of problems. But the problem is that when we always focus on the problems, we're playing on their turf that is toxic to the enterprise and the idea that we can do great things together as a community. And free public education is the best thing that we have ever done. It has been a huge benefit to this community, to this state, to this nation. It's a huge success. And when we never stop to acknowledge that, we play right into the hands of the people who want to tear down our best efforts to have a better community, to have better lives for our children and our grandchildren. So I feel like I've perhaps gone on too long, but let me see if there are a couple more notes here that I need to get to. Definitely one of my favorite tactics that I would encourage you to use as much as you can is to ask questions. Ask questions of your public officials. You'll get so much information about where they stand and what they're doing and how they feel about what it is you're asking about. Think a little bit more about the power that underpins these people, that put them in the spot that they're in. And think about the ways that you can be a part of building that power for a productive, positive movement going forward. I guess I wanted to close by saying that, when you think about building your deck in Magic the Gathering and you're thinking about building it for success, one of the most important things you have to do is not just fill it with those great ideas, not just fill it with those powerful cards that win you the game, but you have to also fill it with those basics, the land, the things that will allow you to build the power to get these spells cast, to get these things done. And in this context, that's showing up, that's voting, that's talking to your neighbors and friends and family, that's promoting the idea that voting's important, that's promoting the idea that government's important, and that's promoting the idea that if we work together and we dialogue with each other honestly and openly, that we can do great things together, great things that we couldn't do as individuals. So thank you for the opportunity. I don't know if anybody has any questions, if we have time, but it's a tremendous honor to represent this community. And, it's just a lot of fun to talk about the connections between Magic the Gathering and what it takes to be successful there and what it takes to be successful in, trying to make change in our community or our state or our nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
I hope I didn't keep you away from the chlamydia too long.
And I'm going to leave this slide up mostly because look at this personalized magic card. But also, if you want to reach out to Jeff, there's lots of ways to do that. Or you could talk to him right now because we're about to take a 10-minute break. Refresh your drinks and be back here soon.
All right, Nerd Night. Good to see everybody. We're going to bring it back. Am I too feedbacky? Is this too loud? Just right? People in the back? Okay, great. So we're going to now get into another mystery. I feel like we started off with the mystery of politics and Magic the Gathering, and now we're going to talk about sexually transmitted infections. Hey, yeah. So chlamydia. For people who may not be aware, chlamydia is the highest reported sexually transmitted infection. Is that right in the U.S., Srishti? Yeah. Okay. All right. So Srishti Bait is going to speak about that. And so let me talk a little bit about her. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Michigan, and she got her doctorate over at the University of Kansas. And she knows a whole heck of a lot about this mysterious bacteria behind chlamydia and its highly resistant. No, just don't listen to me. Listen to Srishti. Here she comes. Let's give her a welcome. Sorry, I biffed it there, Srishti.
Can you hear me? Okay. So, hi everyone. After the intense political discussion that we just had, I'm ready to talk to you about something less intense, chlamydia. So, to begin with, I'm Srishti. I was a graduate student at University of Kansas, for those who know where Kansas is. And so I used to work in University of Kansas in this, sorry, I should have used the pointer, in this dingy building, which was like 100 years old, where I was trying to get my PhD. But now I have my PhD. I'm upgraded to University of Michigan, where I work as a postdoctoral fellow in blood clotting lab. And that's a separate day's discussion. We won't get into that. But before that, but now I'll be talking about my degree or area of expertise, which is microbiology, and more specifically about chlamydia. So to begin with, how many of you know what a bacteria is? Okay, I was anyway going to go into details, so it does not matter. So, so bacteria are like microscopic organisms, and they are extremely small. So think of the smallest ant that you ever saw, and imagine something which is more than 1,000,000 times smaller than that ant. So that's how small the bacteria is in a grand scheme of things. Also, it is ubiquitous. That means it's present everywhere. It is in your food, it is in water, soil, air, anywhere that you can imagine. It's also in your body and it's also on your body. And no matter however much alcohol you drink, you cannot kill the bacteria in your body. It just makes them angry and you won't like it. So, moving on, there are two types of bacteria. So one is a good bacteria, which is like the ones which ferment yogurt, which is good for health, helps you make vitamins, has good properties for people like us in the lab, where we can use it to do different kinds of experiments. However, there are bad bacteria as well, which spoil your food, cause infections, and so on. And our store shelves have a plethora of antibiotics and probiotics. And as much as it is a sobering reminder of our internal division as a nation, it also tells us that bacteria have impacted our lives in huge different ways. And since bacteria can cause infections, what I'll be delving into today is chlamydia, which is caused by chlamydia itself, and it's a sexually transmitted infection. So if you can see here, this red is the animal cell or whatever cell that infects chlamydia and is infected by chlamydia. And this circular structure here, which has green dots in it, each of these individual green dots is one piece of chlamydia. So talking about chlamydia, chlamydia can infect different kinds of species. It can go from chicks to pigs to koalas. Well, that came out wrong, but you get the drift. So next time, when a dog licks your face, you know you're going to get chlamydia. I'm just lying. You don't get You don't get chlamydia when a dog licks your face. And also, dog is not a host for chlamydia as well. But don't let a dog lick your face, it's gross. So, so moving on, the biggest thing with chlamydia is what I think is already given away. It's the highest reported bacterial sexually transmitted infections in the United States, and in all the STIs that are reported bacterially transmitted in the United States. In fact, in Michigan alone, there was more than 40,000 cases that were reported in 2022, and which means that there are about 500 cases, close to 500 cases per every 100,000 number of population in Michigan. So enough about Ohio fans. Moving on, chlamydia also has economic impact. So it's basically, it does not only cause a problem in terms of disease, but a lot of money that you spend is also spent in combating indirect and indirect costs for sexually transmitted infections. So even though you don't care about biology, I'm guessing you care about your tax money and economy, right? So that is also a big challenge with this sexually transmitted spectrum of diseases. So chlamydia, talking about chlamydia, chlamydia is mostly asymptomatic in nature. That means it has no symptoms altogether, and people carry it around, and that is how they spread love, by giving chlamydia to people whom they love. So, but if you have symptoms, there is a huge list of symptoms which looks like this. But majority of the population, chlamydia is non-detectable because it's almost symptomless unless you go for screening. So having said that, there is one big challenge with chlamydia is that majority of the chlamydia cases that you see are between ages 15 to 29, which means that if you get chlamydia early on in your life, and if it is not detected, it can lead to infertility in both males and females. So if you don't want to spend that extra cash on vasectomy, chlamydia is a way to go about it. It's a nature's way to get vasectomy, and you won't like it. So with this being a challenge, since the majority of these cases happen in such a young age, it can cause reproductive problems as you grow older in life and if you're planning to have children. But the good news is chlamydia is highly treatable and it is not antibiotic resistance yet. So there are doses that are given for chlamydia, and but the problem with this is that either of these antibiotics, they also kill the good bacteria in your body, and this can cause gastrointestinal dysbiosis. In simple terms, catastrophic diarrhea. So you won't like it, but basically it is treatable. So now you must be thinking one simple thing: if we can spend money and resources to send a man to the moon, use AI to write my Nerd Nite speech tonight, why can't we use uh, some targeted drugs which are targeted specifically towards chlamydia? Just to clarify, AI did not write my speech. I used a fellow graduate student friend, abused him to give me all the jokes that he got with chlamydia. So thank you, Joseph. He's in Kansas. He's not here. So having said that, chlamydia is highly treatable, but there are no targeted drugs specifically for chlamydia. And this is mainly because chlamydia is an organism which grows inside the cell. So some of you might know that a lot of bacteria grow in a jelly-like substance, which is like over the surface of the plate or like some sort of a media where it can grow on top of the cell. The unique thing about chlamydia is that it can only grow inside the cell. So if you can see here, this transparent outline is the cell, and the green dots that you see is the chlamydia growing. So I'm just going to show you a picture of like how it grows and expands, and it almost takes over the entirety of the cell. That's how much it grows during its developmental cycle. So that makes chlamydia a little more challenging. That makes chlamydia a little more challenging to study because it can only grow inside the cell. So it's very difficult to manipulate chlamydia by first entering the human or whatever cells it's infecting in, and then combating the bacteria as compared to something which would grow out or better. So scientists are trying to find innovative ways using different experimental designs and different approaches to find different things in the chlamydial gene cycle, which is basically like the DNA, the RNA, or the protein, to find ways to combat this disease or find ways to find like vaccines or targeted therapeutics. So one way that the scientists look at this is looking at the proteins in chlamydia. So this weird thing that you see here is, imagine a protein. So either you remove the protein or you add too much of the protein, and then you see what happens to chlamydia. And that's one way that the scientists are looking to understand like how different proteins in chlamydia are important for its growth, development, and its disease-causing ability. Something similar to how you see things work in an engine. For example, spark plug, if you look at the structure, if you removed it and you starting a car, it probably would not start. This is Michigan. I had to use a car analogy. I still don't know what the spark plug does. I have no idea about cars. My husband sitting right there is an engineer, and I have no idea about cars. So that's something similar to what scientists do and try to annotate what each protein does in chlamydia. So this is where scientists like me come in. So me, as a graduate student, was working in one such protein in chlamydia, where when we overexpressed it, that means when we added too much of protein in the growth of chlamydia, we saw that during the early stages of its growth, we were able to inhibit its growth because it was too much protein and the chlamydia was not able to contain it. But when we did the same thing during the later stages of the chlamydial growth cycle, we were able to see that it had no effect on chlamydia whatsoever. Like however much protein it was producing, it did not matter, indicating that some proteins are important at some stages. What did I? Okay, sorry, I don't know. Oh. So indicating that some proteins in chlamydia have a better impact during different stages of developmental cycle or the growth cycle of chlamydia, and had different effects depending on when it was indeed expressed in chlamydia. But don't get too excited. There are 900 genes in chlamydia, and we really haven't studied more than, 20%, 30% of them. So don't get your hopes high yet. So this is something similar that we can use with other organisms and other bacteria to design experiments, to do other studies, and to see what are the other spheres or other proteins that could contribute to the disease-causing ability, not only in chlamydia alone, but in other bacteria, fungi, and even understanding our favorite disease, cancer, which is like very well funded and studied to understand basic biology. With that, thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. Yep.
How are you isolating the chlamydia bacteria? Could you repeat the question in the mic?
Yeah. So the question is, how are you isolating the chlamydia bacteria? So the crude way of isolating what we do in the lab is, when we have the infection in the host cell, we freeze the host cell. So if we freeze the host cell, there is like a change in the pressure of the host cell, which would cause the cell to break. And then chlamydia, you saw like how much chlamydia was there, right? It would release open. And the unique thing about chlamydia, which I did not talk about at all because it was too scientific, is that it exists in two forms. One is infectious, one is non-infectious. So the infectious form is the one which is growing and does not survive outside the host cell. But the non-infectious form is the one that travels between individuals. So when we break that open, we get the non-infectious form of it. And when we infect the cells again, it comes back to being infectious again. So there's like different ways of doing it, but the crude way is just break open the host cell and get the non-infectious form, because it will automatically convert to infectious as soon as you start infecting a new cell. Sorry, it's a little complicated, but yeah. You can ask awkward questions. I know a lot about STIs.
It seems like an interesting area of study. Like, what inspired you to study chlamydia?
That's a good... There is a passionate answer which I give in like all interviews and stuff. I really enjoy science and I really like bacteria. But when I was rotating in the lab, there were a few microbiology labs that were taking students. And I was always interested in infectious diseases. Bacteria did not matter to me because it's a lot similar between different bacteria. So if you get one, you'll probably be able to understand other ones. But honest answer was that lab was taking students. And I was like, okay, this is a nice place. I like bacteria. I understand bacteria, so why not? So, but I'm really passionate about science and I really enjoy bacteria and etc. etc. Yes.
Your numbers would show that there were 43,000 cases of chlamydia in 2022 in Michigan.
Yes.
And in 2021, there were 1.6 million cases reported nationally. That puts Michigan at twice the national average. What makes us so special?
I just moved to Michigan not even a year ago. I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know what you guys do. I only watched the finals 2 days ago because my husband forced me to. I love Michigan. Yes.
I have a follow-up epidemiology question, which is, are there other places in the world or in the country that have similar rates or, a rate of chlamydia? And also, are there specific populations that are more at risk? If you can repeat the question, that would be great.
Yes. Sorry, I forgot those two. But the question was, are there other places in the world which have like similar rates of chlamydia? And the second question was, is one population prone to it more than the other? For the first question, there are. In fact, there are like a lot of developing countries which have it. But the good thing about US is you guys test for these things. So STI is not as tabooed as what it would be in India. So if I go to get an STI testing in India, they would just like judge me and you're like tabooed and then they're like, oh my God. But US encourages STI testing, which is a very good aspect and which gives you an idea like this disease is more prevalent versus which is not. So it's asymptomatic. It's the same thing worldwide. It's just that it's reported more and it's like more awareness is generated as compared to say other countries in the world. So that's the first part. The second part usually is attributed to black population, but that's also because of illiteracy and having multiple sexual partners. So if you're illiterate and if you have multiple sexual partners and you don't have that kind of sex education that would be needed to like prevent diseases like chlamydia, that kind of population would have more impact of a chlamydial disease. Does that make sense? Okay.
So behavioral, not biological, physiological.
I think a little bit of both, right? Because it is asymptomatic, and usually chlamydia does not travel like come by itself. Sometimes people who have chlamydia also have a gonorrhea or syphilis. So it's like usually you almost never have chlamydia alone. Like HIV is something you can have alone because it's just not through sexual transmit. It's also through like syringes and other things. But for chlamydia, it's not that way, right? It's only sexually transmitted. At least the species that I was studying in, and that's reported. It's mostly sexually transmitted. So thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Shriti.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you all. Again, we're going to take another 10-minute break. So refresh that drink one more time, but do come back because we've got another great talk up ahead. Thanks.
All right, Nerd Night. We're going to bring it back for our third and final speaker for the night, Frank Murphy. Yeah. Oh, good. We got some Frank Murphy fans. Good. All right. Raise the roof. I during the break to prepare for this intro, rewatched a trailer from 2001, a Steven Spielberg movie called AI. I'm not sure if anyone else has seen that. Anybody? Okay. So I feel pretty okay. I got a couple claps, a hand. Okay, yeah, almost a guilty hand. Oh, yeah. So yeah, I feel pretty well versed on the subject of AI now, and I'm prepared to learn a whole lot more from Frank here, who escaped from the land of forever hot, Florida, to study at Michigan Tech and considers himself a Michigan convert. Happy to have you here, Frank. He works for a machine learning startup here in Ann Arbor. He resides with his wife and my wonderful colleague, Emily, who he definitely didn't bribe to get a speaker slot for tonight. So let's take it away, Frank.
Hello. All right, as we just talked to, oh, wait, that's the wrong direction. Still, there we go. That's the right direction and a terrifying image, if I might add. All right. So, as was mentioned before, I am Frank. I work for a machine learning startup called Wallaroo. The opinions in this talk are my own. Today, we will be visited by the ghosts of machine learning models, past, present, and future. But first, let's talk about what machine learning means, because it sounds like kind of a funny phrase. After all, aren't these computers just basically rocks we tricked into doing math? The answer is yes, but we can still kind of get these machines to learn via a bunch of algorithms that we've developed over the past few decades. These algorithms are called neural networks. It's all very simple. Basically, we do a bunch of calculus and we feed in a bunch of data. And at the end of this quote unquote training process, we end up with something that's called a model. And these models can then hopefully make predictions about data that they have not yet seen. I'm joking, like this obviously can be very complicated, but realistically, to understand how these models work, you actually only really need to understand two things or ask two questions. The first is, what was the model trained to do? And the second is, what data was used to train that model? So in the past, these models have been rather specialized to different domains, but recently there's a lot of evidence that this might be changing. You probably have heard of ChatGPT in the news. If you haven't, ChatGPT is a computer program that appears to have human-like conversations. It can imitate a human in conversation, and this has made a lot of people very concerned and very nervous. In fact, Congress asked Sam Altman, this person here, to testify about the dangers of ChatGPT and LLMs and AI about like 6 months ago. In what I will sarcastically call, Sam Altman asked Congress to regulate him, and also coincidentally, the competitors hot on his heels for totally non-selfish reasons. Sam is a particularly slick magician, and this is a great act, but I am not fooled by his chicanery. Paul Graham, who worked with Sam a lot, had this to say about him. You could parachute him into an island full of cannibals and come back in 5 years, and he'd be the king. Now, I personally can't imagine doing the kind of things that would be necessary to become a cannibal king, but Paul clearly can imagine Sam doing those things, and I think that says a lot. All right, so let's ruin the magic by exposing the trick that he's doing here. A lot of people that are AI enthusiasts want to talk about existential risk or X risk. The X makes it sound cool. It's this idea that machine learning models will become so advanced that they will outwit us or enslave us or genocide us or some combination of these three things. So the book Superintelligence that you see here is an exposition of this line of thought. But instead of reading this book, if you want to understand machine learning models and how they impact us today, I'd recommend reading this one. It's called Weapons of Math Destruction, and it's about the machine learning models that are out there today. Because here's the thing. It's not future sci-fi problems like superintelligence talks about that we need to worry about. These things are already out there, and we need to understand the present before we can start talking about the future. To illustrate what I mean by this, let's talk about Gritty. Gritty, for those who don't know, is the mascot for the NHL team, the Flyers. He was introduced in 2018 and became an instant internet sensation. In his debut, he fell on the ice and slipped and basically shot his coworker with a t-shirt cannon. And you know, if I could find that footage, I would have it up here, but it's been purged from the internet for what I assume are legal liability reasons. He had other scandals. He punched a kid in the face, allegedly. He wiped a bunch of sharks off of a shelf and then body slammed them. Yes, he jumped a shark, and he is still here to tell the tale. Gritty's awesome. He's amazing. He's chaos personified, but he has his limits. Sure, he dreams of being a CEO, giving dynamic PowerPoint presentations. or being a mayor using scissors and grand openings and that sort of thing, or even a judge using his gavel to dispense justice. But we don't let Gritty do any of these things. Gritty is strange. Gritty does odd things, unexpected things. So we do not trust Gritty. We do not ask his opinion about important matters. We keep him safely locked behind a pane of glass for our amusement. Now let's talk about the differences between Gritty and machine learning. Tech companies are using machine learning models for everything these days. We're trying to sprinkle it on stuff like it's salt. They are already influencing almost every aspect of our lives, and we barely even recognize it. To illustrate my point, we're going to do the dreaded audience interaction segment now. Raise your hand if you have ever used an online dating app. I did too. Like, there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's very common in this day and age. And machine learning models introduced me to my wife. They are what Tinder and Bumble and Hinge or whatever the heck we have to use these days takes the bajillion profiles that we have and chooses 10 or so to show you specifically. They rank the images and the everything like that. So they are a heavy hand that are forcing us as couples together. And this is just one example of where this is happening. Let's look at some others. They're being used in online advertising to deploy targeted ads. And there's, of course, dark sides. They're being used to figure out who might be susceptible to gambling ads. They're being used to target people that are vulnerable to payday loans, especially people, or not especially, sorry, but sometimes people who live in jurisdictions where payday loans are not legal. They are being used by college admission offices to screen the applicants to colleges these days. They are being used by property management companies to set rent and to vet tenants. They are being used by police departments to predict where crime might occur and then preemptively deploy officers to stop that. And if you think you've seen that movie before, you're right. It was called Minority Report. It was not a happy movie. It all feels like this classic tweet that I saw a while back where it describes this exchange between an author and a CEO, where the author says, "In my latest book, I invent the torment nexus as a cautionary tale." And then the CEO comes along and says, "At long last, we've invented the torment nexus from the classic sci-fi novel. Don't invent the torment nexus." The last thing I'll talk about is this case here, which is particularly sad, where machine learning models were used in criminal justice settings to do things like set bail. And of course, they were racist, and of course, they made horrible mistakes. These are real harms happening today. These aren't some sort of futuristic scenario where a machine outwits us and runs away like in a sci-fi novel. It's happening right now. So if there's one thing I want you to take from this talk, any company out there that says it's using machine learning or LLMs or AI, they want you to think it's like happening like this, right? There's just these models of pure thought and energy and goodness working earnestly in your best interest. But I instead want you to think of Gritty. He just finished a game of Edward 40 Hands. He dumped a cooler of Gatorade on some poor intern at their desk, and we have no idea what he's going to do next. Speaking of chaos, let's talk about what happened at OpenAI a couple months ago, where its board fired Sam Altman, that guy whose picture you just saw, and then rehired him like a week later. The lesson here is clear. You come at the Cannibal King, you best not miss. I find this whole thing incredibly, just darkly hilarious, because this board of directors up here, it was full of very serious people who were very concerned about X risk. And they summoned this complex legal structure. Look at this, all these dashed lines and dotted I, like every single one, like a chain, a sacred seal to keep this super intelligence at bay. Now, let's replace one of these arrows with a big green arrow that says money. At the end of the day, which thing do you think mattered the most? Advanced technology and complex legal structures are not the solution to every problem. The board of directors up here, their council of elders, they couldn't best a human CEO trickster with a bag of money. This does not bode well for some kind of end times fight against superintelligence. All right, so far, this talk has probably seemed like scared straight, ML edition. The present's disturbing and the future can seem scary. But I am here to tell you that there is hope if we focus on the right things. Let's talk about those LLM models. What were they trained to do? Guess the next word in a sentence. That's literally it. It's quite simple. What were they trained on? Everything. Every word on the internet, everything ever published on a page. Like, I'm exaggerating, but really not by much. It's read practically everything humans have ever done. And this has allowed it to do some pretty magical things. Things I would have considered impossible about 3 years ago. But there are some amusing downsides. For example, when it comes to logic puzzles, these LLMs, they do a lot better when they're prompted to think step by step first. When it comes to math problems, if they're told to take a deep breath, their scores soar. I think we can all take a little bit of solace here, really, from the fact that even these advanced AI machine learning models are daunted by SAT math problems. But the biggest problem that stems from these is something called confabulation, or sometimes hallucination. This is an actual exchange between a New York Times author and the ChatGPT model. I think it was called Sydney or Bing Sydney, I can't remember at the time, where it says, after some time, I want to be alive, demon emoji. And you're married, but you're not in love, slightly frowny face. Look, this looks like gaslighting and manipulative and weird, but let me try and explain. These models are like actors in a play they don't understand, always trying to guess the next line. We can see with some context here how it started to get off the rails when it's eventually professed that it wanted to be alive. And we can see in this example, the seeds of this love triangle subplot that it cooks up. It probably was influenced, by some online tween forum. I think that the sentence structure and all the emoji spam is a really big hint. But at the end of the day, it's best to think of these models as authors. They're trying to generate something interesting similar to what they have already seen. I say kind of and maybe and probably for all this because we still don't really understand how these things work. It's an active area of research with gajillions of different sub areas. I could probably just do a talk simply on this subject. So let's wrap up here. These models are cool and interesting, and they do all of these kinds of magical things, but they have some serious downsides that we are just beginning to understand, which means when it comes to the hype cycle, we are definitely right about here. So let's talk about that hill that we are looking down. First, spam, everyone's favorite thing. LLMs are clearly going to make spam a lot worse, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to having to scroll through even more story before we can cook up that recipe. But realistically, this is just something that's going to become a bigger and bigger problem. Some people have suggested that we can somehow legally or via some rules force disclosure of AI, say when generative AI is happening. There are vocal proponents for this approach, but we need to be careful here. Because first of all, let's keep in mind that bad actors typically don't follow the rules. So we could just end up with a bunch of laws that we have to abide by, and the people we want to restrain just ignore. But the biggest problem is this shovel is known to the state of California to cause cancer problem, right? We just don't need another round of this. So I just want to note here that it's possible to see a future, 10 to 20 years from now, where these models are ubiquitous. And I really do think they are crossing the line from a tool to a co-author with all the attribution concerns that implies. And I really think that, talking about attribution, there's a lot of ethical things that are important to consider there. And those are things that these models don't consider at all. They do no attribution whatsoever. And you can look at that and argue that they basically are just enabling plagiarism on a mass scale. It's one possible future you can see is 10 to 20 years from now. We look at these models like we look at Napster from the 2000s, where, it was cool, but it was also kind of illegal, and it just paved the way for what came next. Some people have argued that we can use LLMs to catch LLM spam, which, might work, but it also could exacerbate what's called the filter bubble problem. The filter bubble problem is this idea that people seek information that confirms their biases, and they shun information that is uncomfortable or just kind of weird. I, of course, do not suffer from the filter bubble problem. I am enlightened, but everyone else I know does, and it's easy to see how LLMs could make it worse. So look, there's good reasons why people do this stuff, right? There are just opinions out there that are bad. I have read things that I want my time back at the end of, after reading. But it is easy to see how a world of LLM censors fighting LLM spam, excuse me, can just make us more isolated than ever. And that could be a real problem. Realistically, at the end of the day, the problem here is us. And solving the us problem is traditionally the role of education. So let's talk about education, because it's going to change dramatically with the advent of these models. I do think that the era of, the simple write an essay about your feelings and opinions is probably over. There are tools out there that purport that they can detect LLMs are working or at play. They don't work, and I don't think they'll ever be able to work for a simple reason. We are training these models to act and behave like humans. Therefore, anything that can detect when they are not acting like humans, will be used to train them to act more human. It's pretty simple. So what does that mean? I think that means that LLMs in the future will look at like calculators from the past, right? They'll be, not allowed in some assignments, certainly not like basic ones where we're testing that people can form sentences, but perhaps, in future ones, if they are attributed properly and used properly, they will have an important role. We can definitely see a future where this happens. The potential changes, to education run deeper than that, though. One of the big unrealized promises of LLMs currently is they're basically a magic box that knows everything. They could enable this idea of, tutors for everyone, personalized, that answer any question that they have. We obviously just have to get them to stop hallucinating first. I really do think that when it comes to education, humans are going to actually play a more critical role than ever, probably in concert with machines. But the teachers are the ones that are going to have to do things that teachers have been doing since the beginning of time, getting people to ask the right questions, consider the motivations, the biases, the influences of the speaker, and be very aware and concerned about the unseen hidden influences of editors and gatekeepers. Okay, so in summary, I can't help but conclude that a lot of the solutions that propose these future problems for LLMs are very similar to the past ones or the current ones that we have for models, the machine learning models that exist in our life already. We need, to have more disclosure on when these things are at play. We need more transparency, more accountability, more observability from the model makers so we can understand what's happening and why. And realistically, in conclusion, what I'll just say is let's not worry about X risk, even though it sounds cool, because these models today, we need to be able to be working with them properly and get them aligned. We need to be able to detect when they're going off the rails and get them right back on the right tracks. Because if we aren't able to do that now, we are not prepared for what comes next. All right, finally, citations. This talk is heavily influenced by the wisdom of James Mickens, who is, without a doubt or exaggeration, a modern-day philosopher king. This talk, in particular, the gritty jokes, were basically stolen from his keynote speech in 2018. That's now 6 years ago. And it is more relevant than ever. Many of the images you've seen were generated with the help of Stability AI and DALL-E, and most of the books, all of the books you've seen, actually, you can get from AADL or check out from AADL. Ask your local librarian. Thank you all for your time and attention. We have a little bit of time for what I'm most afraid of, which is audience questions. Anyone? Back there. Yes, I will repeat the question. It's turtles all the way down. So the question is that LLMs have been trained on everything on the internet, which is mostly human right now, but of course LLMs are putting stuff out on the internet. So what happens when we reach this future spammy world where everything on the internet, proportionally speaking, is LLMs generated? And the answer is bad things. Like, this is actually something that a lot of people in technology are worried about. OpenAI, for example, and other places, there's a lot of talk about, like having hard cutoffs in terms of when the training data comes in, because the further we get into the future or closer to the present, really, at this point, the more likely it is that they're seeing machine-generated content and it's just the machine talking to itself. That's a very good question. Thank you. Yes. The question is, will we reach general AI all of a sudden or gradually? And the answer is, I do not know. I think that it's sobering, the advances in LLMs, because I'm pretty well versed in this space, and it was a huge surprise to me, right? So I could foresee something like that happening. It is, not outside the realm of possibility. So I don't have a comforting answer there. I really just don't have an answer at all. I don't think it's predictable. Sorry. Sorry. Over here. How much data storage does one of these LLMs take? Surprisingly little. I have one on my laptop right now. I have several on my laptop right now. They're smaller parameter models. They're in like the 7 billion category. To answer your question, like the state-of-the-art ones like GPT, the answer is we don't know. Because despite calling itself OpenAI, it's not open at all about what it does with models anymore. But reasonably, we can extrapolate and stay like less than you would think, which is actually pretty remarkable considering they've basically managed to compress the entire internet into like 7 gigabytes, right? Well, I mean, yeah, it depends on what. Yeah, like if you're talking about what is it like? There's the 7 billion and there's the 50 billion, and are we still good on time? Okay, yeah, like so it really depends. There are different variants of these models that have different sizes. It is easy to like guess that perhaps OpenAI is running much larger ones than we know, but we just don't know. Yes.
What's your favorite thing about working with machine learning?
What's my favorite thing about working with machine learning? I would say just honestly, its capacity to surprise me, and I just have always liked programming since a young age. So it offers a lot of interesting, novel problems that are hard to solve, and my brain that's like crack to my brain. So I enjoy it a lot.
What's your least favorite thing?
What's my least favorite thing? It's everyone's least favorite thing about jobs, and it's meetings. And realistically, that's just like the future is going to also be that communication is the hard part, right? Like it's the most important part, but the hardest part. So, yes. What am I most hopeful for about AI? I would say that it's almost certainly like the potential of personalized tutors. We really need to get that right, but like that could change. Education is the key to so many things, and that really could be a game changer in education if we get it right. It's also potentially one of the most worrying things if we get it wrong. So, okay, this is the last question.
No question, just thank you for the Muppet.
Ah, yes, you're welcome. That you can thank my wife for that actually, and her family.
I need you to come down so I can keep going. Well, I thought that credit was very kind, but it's true. If none of you have seen Muppet Christmas Carol, it doesn't matter that it's not in season now. You should watch it. But really what I'm coming up here to do is to say, again, thank you for coming out. Thank you so much to Live. Again, please make sure you tip your very, very hardworking bartender tonight. And I also want to remind you that Nerd Night is made up of wonderful nerds like the three who spoke tonight. And if you have that little voice in the back of your head that says, I think I might have a talk in me, listen to that voice. And you can put in a submission at annarbor.nerdnite.com, or you can ask us at the library and we can help point you in the right direction. Meanwhile, we will be back next month, and it looks like my screen has left, but I can still see to tell you that it is on Thursday, February 8th, right back here at Live, 7 p.m., doors at 6:30. So I'll see you in February. Thanks for coming out.